Welcome to the Danish Board of District Heating's podcast series. Here we cover different parts of our industry, and this time we will focus on hydrogen. Hydrogen is hot. It's actually very, very hot. Everyone in this podcast fully acknowledges the need for green hydrogen, whereas the hard to decarbonize sectors, that could be industry and transport and many others, will need enormous amounts of green hydrogen. So we are not against hydrogen. But as you will learn in this podcast, hydrogen should never ever be used to heat buildings. That is, never ever directly, but very much so indirectly. And why then the focus on hydrogen in this strictly district heating podcast, you may ask? The answer is that hydrogen can do many good things for district heating, and district heating can do many good things for the hydrogen industry. I look forward to learn about both blue and green district heating and blue and green hydrogen. More about that later. I'm Morten Jordt Duedahl from the Danish Board of District Heating, and I'm your host in this district heating podcast. I have invited two guests, two experts, into my studio today. From the scientific side, I have Oddgeir Gudmundsson, who's Director of Projects from Danfoss. He proves in an article in Hot Cool why hydrogen should never be used for direct heating of buildings. Oddgeir, introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, I have been working for Danfoss for 11 years. I'm an engineer. I do various system analysis for Danfoss on topics of interest. And as you know, most of you maybe know, Danfoss is a technology company focused on energy efficiency.
Good, thank you. And from the, can I say, more practical side of this, I have Jørgen Nielsen. Jørgen Nielsen is managing director of a large district heating transmission company called VEKS in Denmark, and he's also the chairman of the board of the Danish Board of District Heating. And important to this podcast, Jørgen has actually connected district heating pipes to a hydrogen plant to harvest the surplus heat. Jørgen, please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Morten. Yeah, my name is Jørgen Nielsen, and as you mentioned, I'm CEO in VEKS. We're a heat transmission company, so our customers, they are district heating companies and a few industries as well. So what we do is that we're a business-to-business company. We purchase the heat from our heat suppliers, and we sell it basically to the district heating companies. And sort of the latest activity on that is utilizing surplus heat from hydrogen production.
Thank you very much, Jørgen. As you will all hear soon, they are top experts on this topic and have practical experience. So the question is, why should we not use hydrogen to heat buildings, at least directly? And there are two very strong arguments. The first is that heating building with hydrogen does not make any sense seen from an energy efficiency perspective. I think we should start there. Oddgeir, in the article you mentioned black, blue and green hydrogen, but you have also invented blue district heating. That is, to me, somewhat new. I always thought district heating was green, but okay. Can you please talk us through the different colors and explain a little bit about why is it hydrogen in building is such a bad idea?
Yeah, if we start with the colors, then black hydrogen is basically a hydrogen manufactured by fossil fuels, where you just get rid of the carbon out into the atmosphere, so as the CO2 emissions. When you have blue hydrogen, then you have the fossil-based input, and you capture the CO2 in the exhaust stack, and you preferably put that back into the ground. When it comes to the color green, then you have green electricity, so you don't have any CO2 emissions from the process of manufacturing the hydrogen. Now, as for the colored district heating, then for sure, district heating is a green technology in general. But for the purpose of comparing the hydrogen with district heating, I invented the color blue hydrogen to say that it's a system based on a fossil fuel input, the same as the hydrogen system, using the same gas field, for example, processing and all the steps until we come to the district heating plant. And there we generate the heat and we capture the CO2 and store it somewhere. So in that sense, identical emission as with the hydrogen. The green hydrogen is then green district heating is then a district heating system that is running by green energy. When it comes to the efficiency of those solutions, then since they are built on the same concept, you mine the fossil fuels, you have the same losses, relative losses of that state. You need to transport the fuels to where you use them. And I assume in both the hydrogen and the district heating case, we have a plant just outside the urban centers. So from the field until you produce your final energy carrier, you have very similar or identical systems. But that's where things really start to deviate. In the hydrogen scenario, you need to manufacture hydrogen, and that is an inefficient process. And you might have an efficiency of 67% maybe, or 65% from the input energy and what you get out as the hydrogen. Then you pipe that to the building where you have a boiler, which might be 90% efficient. And when you backtrack this kind of a system, you have, if you need 100 units of useful energy at the building, and you accumulate all the losses on the way back to the field, then you end up with a relatively inefficient system. And that also has some ripple effects because you have some fugitive emissions in those gas systems, and those are very bad for the environment. Now, for the blue district heating, then you have some losses, but the losses in the generation of heat from natural gas, it's not particularly high. You have very efficient boilers. You have losses in the district heating system, which are maybe comparable to the losses you would have in the hydrogen boiler. So overall, you have a more efficient system and you lose less of natural gas on the process. When it comes to the green systems, I make the assumption that we have some renewable power coming into a system somewhere. We don't necessarily need to know where. We take that through a transmission grid down to the urban centers. And that just outside the urban centers, we go through the same process. Either we manufacture hydrogen with electrolysis or we generate heat using heat pumps. So there we also see that heat pumps, they actually have very high efficiency, much higher than the amount of input energy you put into it compared to the losses in the electrolysis plants. So there will be an obvious difference in the system efficiency.
Good. So in essence, and you show that in the article with some very colorful Sankey diagrams, there is a tremendous difference. Jørgen, I see you're eager to get in now. That's very good. Tell us what you do in Fredericia with your refinery, and also a little bit about what you see in the future.
Yeah, let me start a bit with the future, because I fully agree with Oddgeir that hydrogen is a very high quality energy carrier. But I also think it's actually much more than that. As you mentioned, it's essential if we want to convert our society into a much greener society, because we need the hydrogen, not for boilers, but for other activities. If we want some green steel, we can use hydrogen instead of natural gas. If we want to refine biomass, we need hydrogen. Chemical industry needs hydrogen, and then the medical industry needs hydrogen. We use a lot of hydrogen today in the refining process. So just if you take your hydrogen in a traditional refining process, you can actually approximately 1 ton of green hydrogen compared to 1 ton of black hydrogen reduces your CO2 emissions at the refinery with 10 ton. So it's really, I would say that hydrogen is sort of the Swiss Army knife in your green transition. So it would be a waste of a high quality energy carrier, but also a high quality and needed chemical component. So it's very important to stick to that. And the value in other industries is much higher than just burning it in a primitive boiler.
And in Fredericia.
And in Fredericia, that's the second part of it, because I think Oddgeir has some very good approaches, but I think we could make an even greener approach here, because you do have surplus heat from your hydrogen production. And you have two kinds of surplus heat. You have a higher quality, meaning higher temperature surplus heat from your stacks, from your electrolysis process. There you have almost 80 degrees, and you need to cool that. So you can deliver the cooling and get the heat from the stack. That's only part of the heat. Then you have a second part, and that is from all your auxiliary processes. That's cooling and pressurizing your hydrogen after you have produced it. That's a bit lower quality. That might be 25, 30 degrees, and you have to put a heat pump on that process to utilize that heat. So we have two streams of energy here: a higher quality, which we can use directly, and a lower quality where you need to add a heat pump. So Oddgeir I would like to see his calculations on an even greener version of this.
Okay, Oddgeir, I don't think you disagree. That's just one level and the next greenest level. So go on.
Exactly. There is nothing. I cannot say anything against this other than that I was aiming for a clear cut between hydrogen for heating and district heating for heating. And the challenge is always that if we have a fantastic technology like district heating, then we basically can couple so many things together to take advantage of the synergies. And that should definitely be included in a future study, just to combine those two things better together.
Okay. Thank you very much. That is the theme for a future podcast. We will do that in a year or so when you have your article out, Oddgeir. It can't take that long. It's a classical example. Science meets what they do out in the real world, and you need to take all these things and make a rather simplified calculation, and then the real world hits you and say, but we can do much better. But
in a year, he can have data.
Yes, in a year you can have data.
Real data.
Real data. Okay, that's a good. He brought that challenge on himself. Don't you agree, Jørgen?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, okay. It might be a little bit uninteresting article since it's so obvious the benefits.
But sometimes you need to state the obvious in a scientific way. I think we agree hydrogen is very good. It should not be used for heating buildings in the direct way. Sorry if I just say heat the buildings, but it should not. But out in Europe, people talk about it and they do things to promote hydrogen for heating buildings in the direct way, individual boilers in your own home. So who do you think got this idea and why? And what is your comments to these efforts? Oddgeir, maybe?
I would generally like to reflect the question back to you, because you are involved, quite heavily involved in markets where we see the hydrogen lobby organization really pushing this agenda, like the UK. So where might they have come with the idea? And
yeah, my deepest feeling is it's the gas industry, the gas lobby that does this. I was in Belgium maybe a year ago. We had a seminar and we met. One of the speakers was from the hydrogen lobby. Lobby sounds so negative, but they're just promoting the hydrogen industry. Two fun facts. The Belgium district heating lobby is, at a good day, 1.5 full-time employees. A part of the Belgium hydrogen lobby is 12 full-time employees. So they are very strong. And it is probably the gas industry that would like to see their own systems, their own infrastructure being used for hydrogen in the future. They can see themselves converting from gas to hydrogen. And if you look at England, they're actually testing it somewhere. They have rolled out hydrogen pipes to individual buildings, maybe not the one-family buildings, a bit larger, but not large buildings where you can talk about de facto district heating system in a building, small buildings. So it's out there.
Just to comment on that, I can basically not understand why you should use high quality, expensive product for household heating. And that's a no-go, as I see it. But I can see if when we have converted, when we need some storage capacity, mainly for your electricity production, then I see it could have a value as an energy storage when you need electricity, and of course have a combined heat and power production there, could give you some heat. But that's the only situation when I see that hydrogen can be used as for heating. That's indirectly as surplus heat in your combined heat and power plant when you need the electricity.
Okay.
I cannot disagree with anything of this, but maybe it's worth it to add that when we talk about hydrogen for buildings, heating demands, we have to also consider that there is a little bit, let's say the equipment is not capable of operating with hydrogen, so that a little bit derails the narrative for the hydrogen, because of course it's fantastic for the right purposes, but having this focus is a little bit off when the existing technologies cannot even cope with high hydrogen blends.
I think there's also against hydrogen an argument about the price, because Jørgen, especially you have mentioned specific industries, transport, medical industry, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of industries, steel, for instance, and they're ready to pay quite a lot more for hydrogen to make these future green products they require. So every time somebody can produce hydrogen, and we have to remember the hydrogen capacity in the world is not nearly big enough to cover the demands in the future.
It's extremely small.
Yes, it's extremely small. Yeah, we need to, quadruple many times. Yeah. So every time somebody have a kilo of hydrogen, there will be somebody who will pay more than the family who needs to heat their home. And they will probably pay a lot more. So when we start providing them with hydrogen, it will cost a fortune for them to heat their home. Okay. Jørgen, you already have a district heating grid, and we have that many places in Denmark. So, yeah, I would say for you to go out to the refinery and getting the surplus heat from their hydrogen production out there was, simply a little bit of planning, a pipe and a pump and some equipment, and then you could connect it. You're laughing at me now, but I'm oversimplifying things. But what about the rest of Europe, where we have somewhere between 10 and 12% of the heat demand covered by district heating? What should they do? Should they also plan for this? What is your thinking on that?
Well, it's of course, I think it's a very good place to start, actually. If you have the opportunity to get access to surplus heat from hydrogen production, it's a good way to start, because it's a bit of a win-win situation, because they need cooling for the hydrogen production, and you need the surplus heat. So it's a good opportunity to make shared investments, and you can actually create a situation where you get green surplus heat from the hydrogen production, and they get free cooling. So you can make a fairly good contract, because the hydrogen producers, they also save capex and they save opex when they can trust your district heating grid. So it's a good place to start developing your district heating grid from that. But of course there are challenges. You have a summer situation in the district heating grid where your capacity is, well, at least in Denmark, it's down with 60% compared to your winter situation. So you don't need that much surplus heat in the summer period. But of course, in Tvis, we have a huge district heating system connected to our transmission grid. So we also have a fairly high summer consumption. So adding surplus heat from a 20 megawatt electrolyzer is not an issue. Adding 300 would be an issue when it comes to a summer temperature in our system, because that would then, in some parts of our system, be too low. So there are issues, but I think they can be solved. It's not sort of extremely difficult to solve them, but it's important to get connected, in contact with the potential hydrogen producers early in the process. In Denmark, we have seen cases where they have placed data centers far away from cities. Of course, that's because they were very good grid connection to the electricity grid, but there's no use for district heating in those areas. So if your distance is if you're too far apart, if your distance is too long, your investments will be basically too high. So it's important to look at your existing infrastructure when you place these new hydrogen production units.
So it's a bit more than city planning. It's also maybe regional planning and including electricity planning. It's a comprehensive energy plan for a larger region, at least.
Yeah, it's important that the planning authorities, whether it's a municipality or a region or a national level, they look into the infrastructure as well. And you traditionally don't do that. You have a company that wants a site, we want a site here, and then you don't look into your existing infrastructure setup. So that part of the planning is new in Denmark at least, and that could add a lot of value to look into that early in the process.
Oddgeir, you marked a few times.
Yeah, I think there are some other aspects at play as well. I think when it comes to the future, we might expect hydrogen to be quite important energy carrier, and it will be stable for a very long time. So where they build those electrolyzer plants, it's not like you just come with a one plant to make the hydrogen. You need to build a lot of infrastructure, power infrastructure for it. So it will stay there for the long term. And this is quite important when it comes to district heating, because it could be a perfect match, actually. And the seasonality in the heating demand, it definitely matters. But on the other hand, if you would locate the hydrogen manufacturing where you cannot use the waste heat, then it's essentially wasted. So just that's important to keep in mind. There can be a lot of opportunities involved in this.
Yes, the nature of district heating is that we use a lot more during the winter and not very much during the summer. So, and if you don't connect it to surplus heat, then the surplus heat is wasted no matter what we do. Now we can substitute some surplus heat with green surplus heat with fossil heat, and in the summer we will just still have to cool some of it away, but at least only a fraction of what we did before. The next thing is, what can district heating do for hydrogen? I understand there are some technical matters about how the hydrogen plant operates. Jørgen, you're much more an engineer than I am. You can explain that. And but you also have some estimates on the numbers for how connecting to district heating, what that adds in revenue and so on for the hydrogen plant. Can you tell us?
Yeah, of course. You do have some savings here, because at least in our system, we don't have any problems with the takeoff side here, because it's not that much compared. We have 2 million megawatt hours a year, and from here we will get a little bit less than 30,000 megawatt hours. So for us it's easy to include in our setup. So the basics for us was just to make the connection and to be sure that the temperature levels is sort of approximately 75 or so. Then we can just take 100% of what they deliver, and then we can deliver the cooling from the cool side of our transmission system. So that's when the setup is there. It was only establishing 1 or 2 kilometers of piping and a heat pump in order to lift the low quality heat from the auxiliary processes. So you can make a good setup with and lower the investments. Also lower the investments from the hydrogen producer, because they can save OPEX and CAPEX in their air coolers. So they have a saving side there, and actually they can operate at higher electricity prices due to that saving, and also due to the revenues they get from the heat. So the revenues from the heat and the savings will add maybe 10 to 15% more operational hours in the electricity system. So and adding even more value with the hydrogen they produce. So it's a win-win situation in this case.
So what you're saying is that you reduce the cost and you give them a revenue stream, and reduction of cost and extra revenue is
producing more hydrogen.
Yes, yeah. And producing more hydrogen flows right through all the accounting system and may turn a very high expense or wet numbers into zero or positive numbers in the accounting system. You simply add benefits to their economy. Interesting.
And is also a fair heat price, I would say. So from our perspective, it's also a very good business case.
Yeah, I think it's the third time we have to say win-win in this podcast. I like that. That's really good. We're running out of time. I have one question before I will ask you to give a comment. A free comment on whatever you think is relevant here. But first, after listening to you, it sounds a little bit like hydrogen has the volume, has the perspective of doing, could do for district heating what the combined heat and power plants have been doing in the 70s and 80s, especially in Denmark, but also before and actually also today. Are we at that magnitude? Is it something that is as important as combined heat and power? Jørgen?
I would say yes. With the hydrogen strategy in Europe and what we have learned now in dialogue with the hydrogen producer and the refinery, and our thinking on power to X, the conversion of our production of green fuels, I think it has a huge potential. Yeah.
Oddgeir?
Yeah, I basically agree with Jørgen, and the need is just to push on energy planning so that this energy can be exploited.
Okay, thank you. When I talk to young people, I think that will be a requirement for them. They will come after men. I'm not age-shaming anyone, our age, men our age, saying, why didn't you do it better when you saw that opportunity with hydrogen Europe? Why didn't you do it better? They will require us to do good planning and not waste energy at all, as long as we can. Good. Final comments before I finish this podcast. Oddgeir, do you have a comment to our listeners?
It is great to be able to participate in this podcast and share our views. And I hope that the audience keep on listening to the DBDH podcast.
Thank you. Jørgen?
I would always say go for the green, cheap heat sources. And that's all they need to focus on. And then they will find hydrogen.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to both Oddgeir from Danfoss and Jørgen from Tvis for your input. It has been a pleasure sitting here with you. We're all over the place, but here on Teams, and discuss this important theme, why hydrogen is so important also for heating, but not in the way we see many places in Europe. And also learning about that it's a vice versa thing. Hydrogen can do a lot of good for district heating, but district heating can definitely also do a lot of good for the hydrogen industry. So let's get some networks rolled out and connected to the surplus heat from any sources, as you said, including hydrogen. Thank you again, and listen in.